Have you ever wondered how a single moment of genuine kindness could completely rewrite the trajectory of two lives? What happens when a struggling father's simple act of help unlocks doors he never knew existed? Sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary problems, and sometimes the person sitting across from you in a crowded cafe holds the key to everything you've been working toward. This is the story of how one laptop, one cafe, and one unexpected conversation changed everything for a man who had given up on dreams and a woman who had forgotten what real integrity looked like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning rain hammered against the windows of Corner Grounds. Café with the kind of relentless intensity that made everyone inside grateful for warm coffee and dry shelter. Marcus Rivera pushed through the heavy glass door, shaking droplets from his jacket while juggling a worn laptop bag and a thermos that had seen better days. The familiar chime of the door announced his arrival, though nobody looked up from their steaming mugs and glowing screens. At 34, Marcus had perfected the art of moving through the world without drawing attention to himself, a skill born from years of making every dollar stretch and every moment count. The cafe buzzed with the low hum of morning conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the gentle clatter of keyboards as freelancers and remote workers claimed their territories for the day. Marcus scanned the room, looking for an empty table near an outlet. His laptop battery had been dying a slow death for months now, and replacing it meant choosing between a new battery and his 7-year-old daughter Emma's art supplies. The choice had been easy, even if it meant planning his work around power outlets and prayer. He spotted a small table tucked into the corner, blessedly equipped with both an outlet and relative privacy. As he wound his way through the maze of chairs and messenger bags, Marcus caught fragments of conversations that painted the usual morning picture of the city's caffeine-dependent workforce. A woman near the window was explaining marketing strategies to someone over a video call, her voice crisp and confident. Two men at the counter debated the merits of different project management software with the intensity usually reserved for sports discussions. Students from the nearby university huddled over textbooks, their conversations peppered with the kind of academic jargon that made Marcus nostalgic for his own college days, before life had taken a sharp left turn into single parenthood and survival mode. Marcus settled into his chair and pulled out his laptop, a 5-year-old machine that wheezed to life with the determination of an old car on a cold morning. While it booted up, he allowed himself the small luxury of simply sitting still for a moment. The cafe's atmosphere was one of productivity and possibility, and even though Marcus felt like an imposter among the young professionals and successful entrepreneurs, he drew energy from their ambition. It reminded him that dreams didn't have to die completely, even when they got buried under more pressing concerns like rent payments and grocery bills. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chun, Emma's babysitter and the elderly neighbor who had become something of a grandmother figure to them both. Emma ate all her breakfast and packed her own backpack. She's excited about show and tell today. Don't worry about us. Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came with knowing his daughter was loved and cared for by people who had chosen to be part of their makeshift family. Mrs. Chun had appeared in their lives 2 years ago when Marcus was desperately trying to juggle freelance web design work with the demands of raising a curious 5-year-old, and she had somehow made everything more manageable without ever making him feel like a charity case. The laptop finally wheezed to full consciousness, and Marcus opened the project that had been consuming his nights for the past 3 weeks. Dataflow Solutions, a mid-sized logistics company, had hired him to redesign their client portal, and while the pay was decent, the timeline was tight. Marcus had learned to work efficiently in public spaces, partly because the background noise helped him focus and partly because staying home during Emma's school hours made him feel restless and isolated. The cafe had become his unofficial office, a place where he could feel connected to the working world even when most of his interactions were with code and pixels. As he lost himself in the familiar rhythm of problem-solving and creation, Marcus became vaguely aware of a commotion at the table directly behind him. A woman's voice, tight with frustration, was engaged in what sounded like a tense phone conversation. The words merger, deadline, and absolutely unacceptable drifted over to his table with increasing frequency and volume. Marcus tried to tune it out, focusing on the navigation menu he was restructuring, but the conversation grew more heated. "No, David, I don't care what the IT department says. I need this presentation ready in 2 hours, and I need the financial projections to load properly. This is a $40 million deal, not a high school science project." The woman's voice carried the kind of authority that made servers straighten their shoulders and other patrons lower their voices instinctively. "Well then, get someone who can make it work. I don't pay you to tell me what's impossible." Marcus heard the sharp snap of a laptop closing, followed by a string of words that would have made Emma's teacher reach for the soap. Despite himself, he found his attention drawn to the drama unfolding behind him. Through the reflection in the cafe window, he could see a woman in an immaculate charcoal gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a style that probably cost more than Marcus spent on groceries in a month. She was staring at her laptop screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for defusing bombs or performing surgery. "Excuse me," came a voice much closer than expected. Marcus turned to find the woman standing beside his table, laptop in hand, looking like she was wrestling with a decision that went against every instinct she possessed. Up close, she was probably in her early 40s, with the kind of sharp intelligence in her dark eyes that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in any room she entered. Her makeup was flawless despite the obvious stress, and her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. Everything about her screamed success, power, and control, which made her current state of barely contained frustration all the more striking. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I couldn't help overhearing that you're working on something technical, and I'm having a complete computer emergency." She gestured toward her laptop with the kind of helpless irritation that suggested technology failures were not a regular part of her universe. "I have a presentation in 2 hours that could make or break a major acquisition, and my laptop just decided to have what I can only describe as a complete nervous breakdown." Marcus saved his work and looked up at her properly. There was something compelling about the way she held herself, a combination of vulnerability and determination that reminded him of Emma when she was trying to reach something on a high shelf. Proud, frustrated, but not quite ready to give up. "What kind of problem are you having?" "Everything." She practically spat the word. "The presentation won't open. Files are corrupting, and every time I try to restart the system, it gives me some cryptic error message that might as well be written in ancient Sanskrit. My IT department is telling me it needs to go to their repair center for 2 to 3 days, which is absolutely not an option." Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Mind if I take a look? I can't promise anything, but I might be able to help." The woman hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Marcus could practically see her mental calculation in progress. Trust a stranger in a coffee shop with potentially sensitive business information, or face the consequences of missing a crucial deadline. Desperation won out over caution, and she sat down, placing the laptop between them like an offering. "I'm Victoria Ashford," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "And I'm normally much more composed than this, but today is not a normal day." "Marcus Rivera," he replied, shaking her hand and noting the firm grip that spoke of someone accustomed to sealing deals and commanding respect. "And don't worry about the composure thing. I've seen grown men cry over corrupted hard drives." Victoria almost smiled at that, the first crack in her professional armor since she'd approached his table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Well, I'm not quite at the crying stage yet, but I'm definitely in the bargaining with higher powers phase. Marcus opened her laptop and immediately understood her frustration. The screen was frozen on an error message that looked like it had been designed by someone who actively hated computer users. The system was clearly struggling with something fundamental, and the usual quick fixes weren't going to cut it. When did this start happening? About an hour ago. I was working. On the presentation, everything was fine, and then suddenly, it was like the computer just gave up on life. Victoria leaned forward, watching his hands move across the keyboard with the focus of someone trying to learn a foreign language through observation. I tried restarting it. I tried all the usual things my assistant usually does, but nothing worked. Marcus began running through his mental checklist of diagnostic procedures, starting with the basics and working toward the more complex possibilities. As he worked, he found himself stealing glances at Victoria, trying to piece together the story behind the perfectly polished exterior. She wore success like armor, but there was something in the way she watched him work that suggested she wasn't used to relying on other people for solutions. Everything about her spoke of someone who had built their life around being in control, which made this moment of technological helplessness particularly unsettling. "So what do you do?" Victoria asked, settling back in her chair as Marcus disappeared into the diagnostic process. "Besides rescue damsels in digital distress, I mean. Freelance web design and development," Marcus replied without looking up from the screen. "Mostly small business websites, some database work, the occasional emergency repair like this." He didn't mention that he'd been doing it for 7 years since Emma was born, or that he'd originally planned to work for a major tech company before life had redirected his priorities. Those details felt too personal for a conversation with a stranger, even one who was trusting him with what was clearly important business data. Freelance. Victoria repeated the word like she was tasting something unfamiliar. "That must be interesting, having that kind of freedom to choose your projects." Marcus looked up at her, catching something wistful in her tone. "It has its perks and its challenges. Not a lot of job security, but I get to work with different people on different problems, which keeps things from getting boring." He turned his attention back to the laptop, where he was beginning to identify the root of the problem. "Plus, I get to set my own schedule, which is important when you have other priorities." "Other priorities?" Victoria asked, and Marcus could hear genuine curiosity beneath the question. "My daughter. She's 7, and she's pretty much the center of my universe." Marcus smiled involuntarily at the mention of Emma, the way he always did. "She's at school right now, probably driving her teacher crazy with questions about how airplanes stay up, or why clouds don't fall down." Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying his face with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. "That must be challenging, balancing freelance work with being a parent." "It is," Marcus admitted, finally isolating the corrupted driver that was causing the system failures. "But it's also the best job I've ever had. Even when she's testing my patience or staying up too late reading because she can't put a book down, she's amazing." Kids have this way of keeping you grounded in what actually matters. As he spoke, Marcus began the delicate process of rolling back the problematic driver and reinstalling it properly. It was technical work that required concentration. He found himself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair. This was what he was good at, this careful unraveling of digital problems until the solution revealed itself. It reminded him of the satisfaction he'd felt in college, working through complex programming assignments until everything clicked into place. "You make it sound easy," Victoria said quietly. "The parenting thing, I mean." Marcus glanced up at her, catching something vulnerable in her expression. "It's not easy. Not even close." Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water, and I'm constantly second-guessing every decision I make. But it's worth it. She's worth it. He paused in his work, really looking at Victoria for the first time since he'd started. Working on her computer. Do you have kids? No, the word came out flat, final, and Marcus sensed there was a story there that she wasn't planning to share with a stranger in a coffee shop. Work has always been consuming. There never seemed to be time for anything else. Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. I get that. Before Emma, I was planning to climb the corporate ladder, work 80-hour weeks, build the perfect career. It's funny how life has a way of showing you what you actually want versus what you thought you wanted. The laptop chimed softly as the system finally stabilized, and Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem solved. Okay, let's see if we can get your presentation back. He navigated to her documents folder, relieved to see that the files appeared to be intact. When he opened the PowerPoint presentation, it loaded smoothly, displaying what was clearly a sophisticated business proposal complete with financial projections, market analysis, and timeline charts. Victoria leaned forward, her relief visible as she saw months of work displayed properly on the screen. Oh my God, it's working. What was wrong with it? Corrupted graphics driver, Marcus explained, closing the presentation and running a quick system check to make sure everything was stable. It was causing conflicts with your presentation software and basically making the whole system unstable. I rolled it back to the previous version and reinstalled it properly. Should be good as new now. Victoria stared at the screen, then at Marcus, with an expression that suggested she wasn't quite sure what had just happened. That's it? After an hour of my IT department telling me it was going to need major repairs, it was just a driver issue? Marcus shrugged, closing the laptop and sliding it back toward her. Sometimes the simplest problems cause the biggest headaches. Your IT department probably would have figured it out eventually, but they were probably approaching it as a hardware issue first, which would take longer to diagnose. How long would this have taken you if I'd brought it to you professionally? Victoria asked, and Marcus detected something calculating in her tone. About 20 minutes, maybe 30 if I had to research the specific driver. It's not a complicated fix once you know what you're looking for. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. He had the distinct feeling that he was being evaluated for something, though he couldn't imagine what. Marcus, she said finally, what do you know about enterprise-level technology solutions? The question caught him off guard. Depends on what you mean. I've worked with database systems, network troubleshooting, some security protocols. Why? Instead of answering directly, Victoria opened her laptop again and pulled up what appeared to be a company website. The header read Ashford Enterprises in elegant font, and the page displayed a portfolio of business acquisitions and technology investments that made Marcus's eyes widen. This is my company, she said simply. I specialize in acquiring struggling businesses and turning them around, usually by implementing better technology solutions and streamlining operations. Marcus scrolled through the site, impressed despite himself by the scope and success of Victoria's business ventures. The numbers were staggering. The client testimonials read like a who's who of major corporations, and the before and after case studies painted a picture of a woman who had built an empire on her ability to see potential where others saw problems. This is incredible, he said honestly. You've built something amazing here. I have, Victoria agreed without false modesty. But I've also reached a point where I'm hitting walls that I can't break through on my own. I have a team of consultants and analysts who are brilliant at the business side of things, but when it comes to the technical implementation, I'm constantly running into problems with vendors who overpromise and underdeliver, IT departments that speak a different language than the rest of us, and technology solutions that sound perfect in presentations, but fall apart in practice. Marcus nodded, understanding where this conversation was heading, but not quite believing it. That's a common problem in business technology. A lot of vendors are better at selling than they are at actually solving problems. Exactly. Victoria leaned forward, her earlier stress replaced by a kind of focused energy that Marcus imagined she brought to every business negotiation. I need someone who can translate between the technical reality and the business need. Someone who understands both the capabilities and the limitations of technology, and who can implement solutions that actually work instead of just looking good on paper. The implications of what she was suggesting began to dawn on Marcus, and he felt his heart rate pick up. Victoria, I appreciate the confidence, but what you're talking about sounds like a much bigger operation than what I do. I'm basically a one-man shop working out of coffee shops and my kitchen table. I know exactly what you are, Victoria. Sud, and there was something in her tone that suggested she'd been making mental notes throughout their entire conversation. You're someone who understands that technology should serve people, not the other way around. You're someone who takes the time to actually diagnose problems instead of just throwing expensive solutions at them. And you're someone who cares more about solving the problem correctly than about impressing people with complicated answers they don't understand. Marcus stared at her, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. What exactly are you offering? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since she'd approached his table, she looked completely relaxed and confident. I'm offering you a chance to stop working for other people's dreams and start building your own. I'm offering you the resources to do the kind of work you're actually capable of, instead of the kind of work you're limited to by circumstance. She paused, letting the words sink in. I'm offering you a partnership, Marcus. Full equity stake, complete creative control over the technical side of operations, and the backing to hire whatever team you need to make it work. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet around them, as if the entire universe was waiting for Marcus's response. He thought about Emma, about the careful budgeting and constant worry about whether he was providing enough for her future. He thought about the dreams he'd set aside when she was born, not with resentment, but with the practical acceptance that some things mattered more than others. And he thought about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to choose between being a good father and pursuing the kind of work that truly excited him. This is crazy, he said finally. You don't know anything about me. I could be completely incompetent or unreliable or any number of things that would make this a terrible decision. Victoria laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face. Marcus, I've built a multi-million-dollar business on my ability to read people and situations quickly. In the last hour, I've watched you approach a complete stranger's problem with patience and expertise. Explain complex technical concepts in terms I could actually understand, and talk about your daughter with the kind of love and dedication that tells me exactly what kind of person you are. She gestured toward her laptop. Plus, you just solved in 20 minutes what a team of supposed experts told me was impossible. I think I know enough. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. A combination of excitement and terror that came with recognizing a life-changing opportunity. Can I think about it? It's a lot to process. Of course, Victoria said, pulling a business card from her purse and writing something on the back. That's my direct number. Take all the time you need, but Marcus? She stood up, laptop tucked under her arm, looking every inch the successful executive again. Don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often, and I have a feeling we could do something extraordinary together. As she walked away, Marcus sat in the suddenly quiet corner of the cafe, staring at the business card in his hands. The front displayed Victoria's name and title in simple, elegant font. Victoria Ashford, CEO, Ashford Enterprises. On the back, she'd written her personal number and a single word, possibilities. Marcus's phone buzzed with another text from Mrs. Chun. This one containing a photo of Emma at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on what appeared to be elaborate drawing of a rocket ship. The caption read, "She says she's designing a spaceship to visit all the planets. She wants to show you when you get home." Looking at his daughter's focused expression, Marcus felt the familiar tug of responsibility and love that had guided every major decision he'd made for the past 7 years. But for the first time in a long time, he also felt something else. The possibility that maybe he could give Emma more than just stability and love. Maybe he could give her a father who was building something meaningful, creating something that would make her proud when she was old enough to understand what he did for a living. The rain had stopped while he wasn't paying attention, and afternoon sunlight was beginning to filter through the cafe windows. Marcus saved his work, packed up his laptop, and headed home to his daughter. Victoria's business card safely tucked in his wallet next to Emma's latest school photo. He had some serious thinking to do, but for the first time in years, the future felt full of possibilities that stretched far beyond just making it through another month. As he stepped out into the fresh air, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn toward something he'd never dared to imagine. The question now was whether he was brave enough to take it. The evening light filtered through the kitchen window as Marcus helped Emma with her homework, her pencil moving carefully across the page as she practiced writing cursive letters. The normality of the moment felt precious after the surreal encounter at the café, and Marcus found himself studying his daughter's concentrated expression, wondering how Victoria's offer might change their quiet routine. Emma's tongue peeked out slightly as she worked on a particularly challenging letter, the same expression of determination she'd inherited from him, showing clearly on her 7-year-old face. "Dad, why do we have to learn cursive when everyone just types on computers now?" Emma asked, looking up from her worksheet with the kind of logical questioning that always caught Marcus off guard. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with genuine curiosity rather than complaint. Marcus smiled, setting down his own laptop where he'd been pretending to work while actually staring at Victoria's business card for the 100th time that evening. Because some things are worth keeping, even when they seem old-fashioned. Plus, writing by hand helps your brain work differently than typing does. Like how you can fix computers even though you don't look like the computer. "Guys on TV?" Emma grinned, revealing the gap where she'd lost a tooth the week before. "Mrs. Chun says you're the smartest person she knows with technology, but you don't wear thick glasses or talk in robot voice." The innocence of her observation made Marcus laugh, but it also stirred something deeper. Through Emma's eyes, his skills weren't just a way to pay bills or a fallback career after bigger dreams had been shelved. They were something special, something that made him unique and valuable. Maybe Victoria had seen the same thing Emma did, something Marcus had stopped recognizing in himself years ago. "Speaking of Mrs. Chen, what did you two do after school today?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious but also grateful for the distraction from his churning thoughts about the job offer. Emma's face lit up with the enthusiasm she brought to her favorite subjects. "We made dumplings." "Well, she made them and I helped. Kind of. I mostly just squished the dough and asked questions." "Did you know that her grandmother taught her to make them when she was even younger than me? And she came all the way from China when she was only 18, which is super brave because I get scared going to the grocery store by myself." Marcus nodded, familiar with Mrs. Chun's remarkable story, but always moved by Emma's way of processing the world around her. Their elderly neighbor had indeed traveled halfway around the world with nothing but determination and a handful of family recipes, eventually building a life that included successful children, grandchildren, and now a kind of adoptive granddaughter relationship with Emma that enriched both their lives immeasurably. She told me about when she first came here and didn't speak English very well, but she learned by watching TV and talking to people at the market. Emma continued, her homework temporarily forgotten. She says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing important things even when you are scared. That's pretty smart, right? The words hit Marcus with unexpected force, and he found himself wondering if Mrs. Chun's wisdom had been perfectly timed for his current dilemma. The fear was certainly there, a cold knot in his stomach that whispered about all the ways Victoria's offer could go wrong. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt suspiciously like excitement mixed with hope. "Yeah, sweetheart. That's very smart," Marcus said, ruffling Emma's hair affectionately. "Mrs. Chun is pretty wise about a lot of things." Emma returned to her cursive practice, but Marcus could tell she was processing something important. After a few minutes of careful letter formation, she looked up again with the kind of serious expression that meant she was about to say something significant. "Dad, are you scared about something? You keep looking at that piece of paper like it might bite you." Marcus glanced down at Victoria's business card, which he'd apparently been fidgeting with unconsciously. The perceptiveness of children never failed to amaze him, especially Emma's uncanny ability to read his moods, even when he thought he was hiding them well. "Maybe a little scared," he admitted, deciding that honesty was usually the best policy. "With Emma, someone offered me a really interesting job today, but it would mean some big changes for us." Emma set down her pencil and gave him her full attention, the same focused look she wore when she was trying to understand something complex in school. "Good changes or bad changes?" "Potentially very good changes," Marcus said carefully. "But change is always a little scary, even when it might be good. It would mean working with different people, maybe earning more money, but also having more responsibility." "More responsibility like when I got to be the line leader at school?" Emma asked hopefully. Marcus smiled at the comparison. "Kind of like that, but bigger, much bigger." Emma considered this seriously, her young mind working through the implications with surprising sophistication. "Would we have to move?" "Because I really like our apartment, and Mrs. Chun is right next door, and I just figured out the best route to school that goes past the dog park." The practical concerns of a 7-year-old brought Marcus back to earth with a gentle thud. In all his mental calculations about Victoria's offer, he'd been focused on the professional aspects, the financial security, the potential for growth and creativity. But Emma's world was built around routine, familiar faces, and the carefully constructed support system they'd spent years building together. "I don't think we'd have to move," Marcus said, though he realized he actually had no idea what Victoria's offer would require in terms of location or schedule. "But I'd probably travel sometimes, maybe work longer hours some days." Emma's expression grew more serious. "Would Mrs. Chun still be able to take care of me? Because I don't want a different babysitter. She makes the best snacks and she never gets mad when I ask too many questions." "Mrs. Chun will always be part of our lives," Marcus assured her, meaning every word. Their neighbor had become family in the truest sense, and no job offer, no matter how appealing, would change that relationship. "But these are exactly the kinds of things I need to think about before I make any decisions." Emma nodded sagely, then returned to her homework with the matter apparently settled in her mind. But Marcus could see her stealing glances at him, and he knew she'd be processing this conversation for days, probably coming up with questions and observations that would help clarify his own thinking. After Emma finished her homework and they'd shared dinner, a simple affair of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that Emma insisted on making herself with minimal supervision, Marcus found himself alone in the quiet apartment with Victoria's business card and his own swirling thoughts. The evening routine of dishes, Emma's bath time, and the bedtime story had provided blessed distraction, but now, with Emma safely asleep and the apartment settled into nighttime calm, the weight of the decision pressed down on him with renewed intensity. Marcus opened his laptop and, almost without conscious thought, began researching Ashford Enterprises more thoroughly than he'd had time for during his brief look at Victoria's website. What he found was both impressive and slightly intimidating. Victoria hadn't been modest about her success. If anything, she'd undersold it. Her company had a track record of identifying struggling businesses with good bones and transforming them into profitable ventures through what the business magazines called innovative integration of human capital and technological optimization. The more Marcus read, the more he understood what Victoria saw in him. Her approach wasn't about imposing cookie-cutter solutions or following the latest business school theories. Instead, she seemed to specialize in finding the core problems that were holding companies back and addressing them with surprisingly practical solutions. A restaurant chain that was hemorrhaging money due to inventory waste had been transformed by implementing a simple but elegant tracking system that reduced food costs by 30% while improving customer satisfaction. A manufacturing company on the brink of bankruptcy had been saved by streamlining their production scheduling and improving communication between departments. The case studies read like stories of resurrection, businesses brought back from the dead not through massive capital infusions or dramatic restructuring, but through careful diagnosis and targeted intervention. It was problem-solving on a scale Marcus had never imagined, but the underlying approach felt familiar. It was the same methodical thinking he brought to diagnosing computer problems, just applied to entire organizations instead of individual machines. As he delved deeper into the research, Marcus began to understand that Victoria's offer wasn't just about adding technical expertise to her team. She was looking for someone who could bridge the gap between the business vision and the technological reality, someone who could translate ambitious goals into practical implementation. The more he read about her previous successes, the more he began to see how his particular combination of technical skills and practical experience might fit into her larger strategy. But understanding the opportunity didn't make the decision any easier. Marcus had spent 7 years building a life that prioritized stability and predictability, making choices that put Emma's needs ahead of his own ambitions. The freelance work paid the bills and allowed him flexibility, but it also kept him safely in a world he understood, with risks he could calculate and control. Victoria's offer represented a leap into unknown territory, the kind of career opportunity he'd dreamed about in college, but had stopped believing was possible once real life intervened. The financial security alone would be transformative. Emma would never again have to worry about whether they could afford new school clothes or the occasional dinner out. But beyond the money was something potentially more valuable, the chance to use his skills on projects that mattered, to build something significant instead of just maintaining other people's systems. Marcus closed the laptop and walked to Emma's bedroom door, listening to her steady breathing in the darkness. She slept with complete trust that tomorrow would bring safety and love, that the world she knew would still be there when she woke up. That trust was both the foundation of everything Marcus had built and the weight that made every major decision feel monumental. The next morning brought a return to routine that felt both comforting and somehow insufficient after the possibilities Victoria had opened up. Marcus walked Emma to school, chatting about her plans for the day and listening to her theories about why some leaves changed colors faster than others. The familiar rhythm of morning conversations and goodbye hugs provided the stability he treasured, but underneath his parental contentment was a restless energy that hadn't been there the day before. After dropping Emma off, Marcus found himself walking past Corner Grounds Café, drawn by curiosity about whether the previous day's encounter had been as significant as it felt, or just one of those random moments that seem important in the immediate aftermath but fade into ordinary memory with time. The café looked exactly the same, filled with the same mix of students, freelancers, and business people pursuing their various morning rituals. He ordered his usual coffee and settled at a different table, pulling out his laptop with the intention of working on a client project that had a deadline approaching. But instead of opening his design software, Marcus found himself staring at the corner table where he'd met Victoria, replaying their conversation and trying to parse the subtext he'd been too surprised to fully process in the moment. Marcus? Marcus Rivera? The voice made him look up to find Tom Bradley, a former colleague from his brief stint at a large consulting firm shortly after college. Tom looked exactly as Marcus remembered him: sharp suit, confident smile, and the kind of polished appearance that suggested career success and careful personal branding. Tom, wow, it's been, what, 8 years? Marcus stood to shake hands, genuinely pleased to see a familiar face, even though their friendship had faded after Marcus left the corporate world. At least 8 years. I heard through the grapevine that you'd gone freelance, but I wasn't sure if that was true. Tom settled into the chair across from Marcus with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to networking conversations. How's that working out for you? It's been good, Marcus replied, meaning it more than he would have yesterday. Lots of variety, interesting projects, flexibility to spend time with my daughter. Right, you have a kid now. That's great. Man, family life treating you well? Tom's tone was genuinely warm, though Marcus detected the subtle calculation that came with catching up with old colleagues, the mental comparison of career trajectories and life choices. Emma's amazing. 7 years old and already smarter than me about most things. Marcus felt the familiar pride that came with talking about his daughter, but also a new awareness of how his choices looked from the outside. She keeps me grounded. Tom nodded approvingly. That's really cool that you found a way to balance work and family. I'm still trying to figure that out. The hours at my firm are pretty brutal, but the partnership track is finally looking realistic. What kind of law are you practicing now? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the path his old friend had taken. Corporate mergers and acquisitions. Mostly. It's intense work but incredible learning opportunities. Actually, funny coincidence. We're representing a client right now who's being acquired by Ashford Enterprises. Ever heard of them? Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Ashford Enterprises, Victoria Ashford's company. Tom's eyebrows rose with interest. You know Victoria Ashford? That's impressive. She's kind of a legend in the business world. Brilliant, ruthless, and incredibly successful. My client is actually thrilled about the acquisition because her track record for turning companies around is phenomenal. What's she like to work with? Marcus asked, trying to sound casual while his heart rate picked up with the synchronicity of the conversation. Haven't worked with her directly, but everyone who says she's tough but fair. Demanding as hell, expects perfection, but she backs up her people and delivers on her promises. Tom leaned forward conspiratorially. Word is she's looking to expand into new markets, maybe build a more permanent team instead of just using outside consultants. The right person could probably write their own ticket with her. Marcus felt the universe nudging him toward a decision he wasn't ready to make. That's interesting. She seems like someone who would be intense to work for. Probably, but also the kind of person who could take your career places you never imagined. Tom checked his watch and signaled for the check. Actually, if you're interested in that world at all, I could probably make some introductions. The business development side of what she does might be right up your alley, especially with your technical background. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind, Marcus said, not mentioning that the introduction had already been made in the most unexpected way possible. After Tom left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and the growing sense that the universe was conspiring to push him toward Victoria's offer. First Mrs. Chun's wisdom about courage, then Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of change, and now this random encounter with someone who could provide outside perspective on the opportunity he was wrestling with. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Hope you're having a good morning. No pressure, but wanted you to know the offer stands whenever you're ready to discuss details. Also wanted to thank you again for yesterday. That presentation went perfectly, and the acquisition is moving forward. Sometimes the right help comes from the most unexpected places. Marcus stared at the message, struck by her mention of unexpected help. Victoria was clearly someone who planned meticulously and controlled as many variables as possible, but she'd also recognized that their chance encounter had provided exactly what she needed when she needed it most. Maybe that willingness to embrace the unexpected was part of what made her successful. Instead of responding immediately, Marcus decided to spend the day doing something he hadn't done in years. He cleared his schedule and dedicated the entire day to thinking about what he actually wanted from his career and his life. Not what was practical or safe or responsible, but what would make him excited to get up in the morning. The exercise was harder than he'd expected. After 7 years of making decisions based primarily on Emma's needs and their financial security, Marcus had to dig deep to remember what had originally drawn him to technology and problem solving. But as he walked through the city, observing the flow of people and businesses, and the countless systems that kept everything functioning, he began to reconnect with the part of himself that was energized by complexity and challenge. He found himself in the downtown business district, looking up at the glass towers that housed the kind of companies Victoria acquired and transformed. For the first time in years, instead of feeling intimidated or out of place, Marcus felt curious. What problems were the people in those buildings trying to solve? What systems were failing them? What opportunities were they missing because they couldn't bridge the gap between ambitious vision and practical implementation? By late afternoon, when it was time to pick up Emma from school, Marcus had reached a conclusion that surprised him with its clarity. He wasn't ready to make a final decision about Victoria's offer, but he was ready to take the next step. He was ready to have a real conversation about what partnership with her might look like, what it would require from him, and how it might change their lives. Emma emerged from school with paint-stained fingers and the kind of creative chaos that suggested art class had been particularly engaging. As they walked home together, she chattered about her day with the unconscious confidence of a child who trusted that her father would always be there to listen, to care, and to make the right decisions for their family. "Dad, I was thinking about what you said yesterday about the job thing," Emma said as they stopped at a crosswalk. "I think you should do it if it makes you happy. Mrs. Chun says happy parents make happy kids, and you've been kind of serious lately." Marcus looked down at his daughter, amazed once again by her perceptiveness and the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children. "What if it means some changes for you too? New routines, maybe me traveling sometimes?" Emma shrugged with the adaptability that had carried her through various life transitions. "Changes can be good. Remember when we moved to our apartment and I was scared because it was different from the old place? But then we met Mrs. Chun and found the park with the good swings, and now I like it better." That evening, after Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Marcus pulled out his phone and composed a text to Victoria. "I'd like to learn more about what partnership with you would look like. When would be a good time to have a more detailed conversation?" Her response came back within minutes. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my office. I'll send you the address. Thank you for being open to the possibility, Marcus. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary." As Marcus turned off the lights and headed to bed, he felt a combination of nervousness and anticipation that reminded him of the night before important exams in college. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions he'd been afraid to ask, and potentially the first step toward a future he was only beginning to imagine. The city hummed with its usual energy outside his bedroom window. Millions of people pursuing their own dreams and challenges and opportunities. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was about to become an active participant in that larger story, instead of just a careful observer trying to maintain his small corner of stability. Whatever happened next, he was ready to find out. The elevator climbed steadily toward the 32nd floor of the gleaming downtown tower, and Marcus found himself checking his reflection in the polished steel doors for the third time. He'd chosen his best button-down shirt and the one pair of dress pants that still fit properly. But standing in the pristine corporate environment, he felt acutely aware of the gap between his freelancer's wardrobe and the executive world he was about to enter. The building itself was a monument to success, all marble and glass, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money and power. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus stepped into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that first impressions could make or break business relationships. The space was elegant without being intimidating, professional without being cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and the furniture struck a perfect balance between comfort and sophistication. A young woman behind the reception desk looked up with a warm smile that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "You must be Marcus Rivera," she said, standing to greet him. "I'm Sarah, Victoria's assistant. She's just finishing up a call, but she'll be with you in just a moment. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water, tea?" "Coffee would be great, thank you," Marcus replied, grateful for something to do with his hands. The nervous energy that had been building all morning needed an outlet, and he found himself studying the artwork on the walls, abstract pieces that somehow managed to be both calming and energizing. Sarah returned with a cup of coffee that smelled significantly better than anything Marcus had ever made in his own kitchen, served in a mug that probably cost more than he usually spent on groceries in a week. As he sipped the perfectly brewed coffee, Marcus tried to settle his nerves by reminding himself that Victoria had sought him out, not the other way around. She'd seen something in him that she valued, and this meeting was about exploring mutual opportunity, not him begging for a job. "Marcus, thank you for coming." Victoria's voice carried across the reception area as she emerged from what was clearly the corner office, and Marcus was struck again by the way she commanded attention simply by entering a room. Today she wore a navy blue suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for her, and her dark hair was pulled back in a style that managed to be both professional and elegant. But despite the executive polish, there was something warmer about her demeanor than there had been during their crisis-driven first meeting. "Thank you for inviting me," Marcus replied, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, but he caught a flicker of something that might have been nervousness in her eyes, which made him feel slightly less out of place. "Come on back to my office. I thought we could talk privately about what this partnership might look like." Victoria led him down a hallway lined with what appeared to be awards and photographs documenting her various business successes. Marcus caught glimpses of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, handshake photos with people who looked important, and framed articles from business magazines that featured Victoria's picture and headlines about innovation and transformation. Victoria's office was impressive without being ostentatious, a space that clearly belonged to someone who took their work seriously but hadn't forgotten that business was ultimately about human relationships. The desk was substantial but not overwhelming. The seating area by the windows was designed for actual conversation rather than just show, and personal touches like a few carefully chosen books and a small collection of what looked like travel souvenirs suggested that there was a real person behind the executive persona. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," Victoria said, gesturing toward the seating area. "I thought we could start with some basic questions about what you're looking for in a career opportunity, and then I can share more specifics about what I have in mind." Marcus chose one of the chairs facing the windows, partly because the view was spectacular and partly because having something beautiful to look at might help calm his nerves. "I have to admit, this is all pretty surreal for me. Yesterday, I was debugging website code in a coffee shop, and today I'm having a business meeting in a corner office overlooking the city." Victoria laughed, settling into the chair across from him with a grace that spoke of years of practice at making people feel at ease. "I know the feeling. 5 years ago, I was working 18-hour days trying to save my first acquisition from complete collapse, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Success can happen faster than you expect, but it still feels impossible until it becomes inevitable. There was something reassuring about hearing that Victoria had experienced doubt and uncertainty, that her current success hadn't been handed to her or achieved without struggle. Marcus found himself relaxing slightly, reminded that despite the impressive office and obvious wealth, he was talking to someone who understood what it felt like to bet everything on an uncertain outcome. What made you decide to start your own company instead of working for someone else? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her to this level of success. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city skyline with an expression that suggested she was remembering something specific. I spent 5 years working for a management consulting firm after business school, and I was good at it, really good. I could analyze problems, develop solutions, present recommendations. That looked perfect on paper. But I got frustrated watching my brilliant strategies get watered down or completely ignored because the implementation was too complicated or expensive or politically difficult. She turned back to Marcus, and he could see the passion that drove her success burning in her eyes. I realized that having the right answer doesn't matter if you can't make it actually work in the real world. Most consulting firms are great at identifying problems and terrible at solving them in a way that sticks. I wanted to be in a position where I could see projects through from diagnosis to long-term success. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. That's something I've run into with freelance work too. Clients will ask for a technical solution, but they don't want to hear about the organizational changes or training that would be required to make it actually effective. They want a magic fix that doesn't require them to change anything about how they operate. Exactly. Victoria leaned forward, clearly energized by finding someone who understood her perspective. That's why I think you and I could work well together. You understand that technology is only as good as the people implementing it, and the people are only as effective as the systems supporting them. Real solutions require both technical expertise and human insight. Marcus felt a flutter of excitement at the idea of working on problems that complex and significant, but he also needed to understand the practical realities of what Victoria was proposing. Can you tell me more specifically what kind of role you're envisioning? I want to make sure I understand what would be expected of me. Victoria stood and walked to her desk, returning with a folder that looked like it contained detailed planning documents. I've been thinking about this since our conversation yesterday, and I've put together some preliminary ideas. But first, let me ask you something. If you could design your ideal professional situation, with no constraints about money or logistics or anything else, what would it look like? The question caught Marcus off guard, partly because it had been so long since he'd allowed himself to think in those terms. For years, his professional decisions had been driven primarily by practical considerations. What would pay the bills while allowing him to be present for Emma? The idea of starting with what he actually wanted felt both liberating and slightly terrifying. I think, Marcus said slowly, working through thoughts that had been buried under years of responsibility and pragmatism, I'd want to work on problems that actually matter. Not just maintaining systems or fixing things that break, but building solutions that make people's lives better or help organizations accomplish things they couldn't do before. Victoria nodded encouragingly, and Marcus found himself gaining confidence as he articulated desires he'd barely admitted to himself. I'd want to work with a team of people who were as committed to doing excellent work as I am, where everyone's expertise was valued and utilized properly. And I'd want to have enough resources to implement solutions correctly instead of having to compromise because of budget constraints or arbitrary deadlines. Marcus paused, then added something that surprised him with its honesty. And I'd want to be building something that my daughter could be proud of when she's old enough to understand what I do for work. Something that would show her that taking calculated risks and working hard toward meaningful goals can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Victoria smiled, and Marcus could see that his answer had resonated with her in some important way. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Because what I'm proposing isn't just a job or even a traditional partnership. I'm talking about building something entirely new together. She opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table between them. Marcus could see organizational charts, financial projections, and what appeared to be detailed business plans, all professionally prepared, but clearly focused on a venture that didn't yet exist. My current business model has been very successful, Victoria continued, but it's also limited by the fact that I'm essentially a one-person operation with support staff. I can only take on so many projects at a time, and I'm constantly having to choose between opportunities because I don't have the capacity to pursue everything that interests me. Marcus studied the documents, beginning to see the shape of what Victoria was proposing. The organizational chart showed a structure that would allow for multiple simultaneous projects, with specialized teams handling different aspects of each engagement. The financial projections suggested revenue potential that was significantly higher than Victoria's current business, but also operating expenses that would require careful management and substantial initial investment. What I'm envisioning, Victoria said, is a partnership where you would lead the technology and implementation side of operations, while I focus on business development and strategic planning. We'd be co-founders of something that could eventually become much larger than what either of us could build individually. The magnitude of what she was suggesting began to sink in, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he processed the implications. This wasn't just a job offer or even a consulting arrangement. Victoria was proposing that they build a company together, with shared ownership and shared risk and the potential for shared success on a scale he'd never imagined. This is incredible, Marcus said, looking up from the documents to meet Victoria's gaze, but I have to ask the obvious question, why me? You could partner with someone who has more experience in corporate environments, someone with an MBA and a track record of building businesses. Victoria leaned back in her chair, considering her answer carefully. I've worked with a lot of people who look perfect on paper, Marcus. People with impressive credentials and polished presentations and all the right connections. And many of them are very good at what they do. But they're also products of the same system that creates the problems I'm trying to solve. She gestured toward the city visible through the windows. Most business schools teach people to think in terms of quarterly profits and stakeholder management and competitive advantage. They don't teach people to see systems holistically or to value long-term sustainability over short-term gains. They certainly don't teach people to troubleshoot problems with the kind of patience and persistence you showed with my laptop. Marcus found himself nodding, understanding her point even as he struggled to believe that his practical experience could be more valuable than formal business education. Beyond that, Victoria continued, you have something that can't be taught in any graduate program. You understand what it means to be responsible for outcomes that really matter. When you're raising a child as a single parent, you can't afford to make decisions based on theory or wishful thinking. You have to be practical, resourceful, and focused on what actually works. The reference to Emma brought Marcus's attention back to the personal implications of what Victoria was proposing. The opportunity was exciting and potentially transformative, but it would also represent a significant change in the carefully balanced life he'd built around his daughter's needs. Can you help me understand what this would mean in terms of day-to-day responsibilities? Marcus asked. I need to make sure I can still be the kind of father Emma deserves. Victoria's expression softened, and Marcus could see that she'd been expecting this question. That's actually one of the things I find most appealing about partnering with you. I've watched too many talented people burn out because they tried to maintain unsustainable work schedules. I think we can build something that's both successful and humane. She pulled out another document, this one outlining proposed work, arrangements, and company policies. I'm thinking we start with a structure that gives you significant flexibility in terms of when and where you work, as long as the results meet our standards. Some of our projects will require travel, but we can plan around Emma's school schedule and make sure you're not away from home more than is absolutely necessary. Marcus studied the proposed arrangements, impressed by the thoughtfulness Victoria had put into addressing his concerns about work-life balance. The structure she was proposing would actually give him more flexibility than his current freelance work, while providing significantly more financial security and professional growth opportunities. "There's something else," Victoria said, and Marcus could hear a note of vulnerability in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I want to be completely honest with you about why this partnership matters to me personally, not just professionally." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city with an expression that suggested she was about to share something she didn't discuss often. "I've been successful by most measures, but I've also made choices that have left some important parts of my life underdeveloped. I've prioritized career advancement over personal relationships, business growth over community involvement, financial achievement over the kind of meaningful connection that makes success feel worthwhile." Victoria turned back to Marcus, and he could see something in her eyes that looked like regret mixed with determination. "Watching you with Emma, seeing how you've built a life that puts relationship and responsibility at the center while still pursuing professional excellence, made me realize that maybe success doesn't have to require the kinds of sacrifices I've been making." The honesty of her admission surprised Marcus and made him see Victoria in an entirely new light. Behind the polished executive exterior was someone who had achieved remarkable professional success, but was still searching for the kind of fulfillment that came from building something meaningful with people you cared about. "I'm hoping," Victoria continued, "that partnering with you might help me create a business that's successful, not just financially, but in terms of the impact we have on the people we work with and the communities we serve. I want to build something that would make sense to a 7-year-old, something that clearly makes the world a little better." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of what Victoria was offering. This wasn't just a business opportunity or even a career advancement. It was a chance to build something that aligned with his deepest values while also providing the kind of professional challenge and financial security he'd only dreamed about. "I have one more question," Marcus said, looking directly at Victoria. "What happens if this doesn't work? If we discover that we're not compatible as business partners, or if the market doesn't respond the way we expect, or if any of a dozen other things go wrong?" Victoria smiled, and Marcus could see that she appreciated his practical approach to evaluating the opportunity. "That's a fair question, and I've given it a lot of thought. First, we structure the partnership so that both of us retain enough individual assets and capabilities to land on our feet if things don't work out. Second, we build in regular evaluation points where we can assess how things are going and make adjustments if necessary." She returned to her chair and pulled out one final document. "But most importantly, we start with a project that allows us to test our working relationship and business model without betting everything on the outcome. I have a potential client who's been asking me to take on a larger engagement that I can handle individually. If we can successfully work together on that project, it would give us both the confidence and the capital to move forward with the larger partnership." Marcus looked at the project overview, which described the mid-sized manufacturing company that was struggling with inefficient systems and poor communication between departments. The scope of work included organizational analysis, technology upgrades, staff training, and ongoing support. It was exactly the kind of comprehensive approach that Victoria had described as her specialty, but it would require the kind of technical expertise and implementation support that Marcus could provide. The timeline would be 6 months, Victoria explained, with the option to extend if the initial results are promising. It would give us a chance to see how we work together under real pressure, with real deadlines and real consequences for success or failure. Marcus studied the project details, already beginning to see potential solutions and implementation strategies. The challenge was complex enough to be intellectually engaging, but focused enough to be manageable. It would require him to stretch his skills and work at a higher level than most of his freelance projects, but it didn't feel overwhelming or impossible. What would the financial arrangement be for this initial project? Marcus asked, reminding himself that practical considerations were still important even in the midst of exciting possibilities. 50-50 split of all profits after expenses, Victoria replied without hesitation, plus a guaranteed minimum that would be significantly more than you're currently earning from freelance work, even if the project doesn't go as well as we expect. The financial terms were more generous than Marcus had dared to hope, but beyond the money was something even more valuable, the chance to prove to himself that he could operate successfully at this level of business complexity and responsibility. I think, Marcus said slowly, I'd like to try the initial project and see how we work together. Victoria's face lit up with genuine excitement, and Marcus realized that despite her professional success and obvious confidence, she had been nervous about his answer. Really? You're willing to take the chance? I'm willing to take the chance, Marcus confirmed, feeling a combination of terror and exhilaration that reminded him of the moment he'd decided to leave his corporate job all those years ago. When would we start? The client is expecting our proposal next week, Victoria said, already reaching for her calendar. If you're committed to moving forward, I'd like to spend the rest of this week working together on the proposal, so you can see exactly what's involved in our process. Marcus thought about Emma, about Mrs. Chun, about the carefully constructed routine that had provided stability for his family. Then he thought about the possibility of building something extraordinary, of showing his daughter that calculated risks and hard work could lead to opportunities beyond anything they'd previously imagined. Let's do it, he said, extending his hand to Victoria. Let's see what we can build together. As they shook hands, Marcus could see the city spread out below them through the office windows, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and challenges and opportunities. For the first time in years, he felt like he was about to become an active participant in that larger story, someone who was building rather than just maintaining, creating rather than just surviving. Whatever happened next, he was ready to find out. The week that followed transformed Marcus's understanding of what business at Victoria's level actually entailed. Each morning, he arrived at her office before 8 and stayed until well past 6, immersed in a world of strategic planning and complex problem-solving that challenged every skill he developed over his career. The manufacturing company project, which had seemed manageable in their initial discussion, revealed layers of interconnected issues that required the kind of systematic thinking Marcus had always enjoyed, but had never applied on such a scale. Victoria worked with an intensity and focus that was both inspiring and slightly intimidating. She approached each aspect of the client's problems with forensic precision, asking questions that revealed assumptions Marcus hadn't even realized he was making. Her process was methodical yet creative, combining rigorous analysis with intuitive leaps that somehow always led to insights he wouldn't have reached on his own. Watching her work, Marcus began to understand why her success rate was so remarkably high. The challenge with Meridian Manufacturing, Victoria explained as they reviewed floor plans and workflow diagrams spread across her conference table, isn't just that their systems are outdated. It's that they've built their entire operation around compensating for inefficiencies instead of eliminating them. Marcus studied the documentation they'd gathered during their initial site visit, seeing the patterns Victoria was highlighting. The company had developed elaborate workarounds for problems that could have been solved with better technology and clear communication protocols. Over time, these workarounds had become embedded in the company culture, making employees resistant to changes that would actually make their jobs easier. It's like they've gotten so used to working harder that they can't imagine working smarter, Marcus observed, thinking about the supervisor they'd interviewed who had seemed proud of the complex manual tracking system he'd developed to compensate for the company's inadequate inventory software. Exactly. And that's why this project is such a good test case for our partnership, Victoria said, highlighting several interconnected issues on their analysis chart. The technical solutions are actually straightforward, but implementing them requires us to address the human and organizational factors that created the problems in the first place. Marcus nodded, beginning to see how his technical expertise and Victoria's business acumen could complement each other in ways that neither could achieve independently. The manufacturing company needed new software systems and better equipment, but they also needed training, change management, and ongoing support to ensure that the improvements would be sustainable. "What's our timeline for the proposal presentation?" Marcus asked, reviewing the comprehensive document they'd been developing throughout the week. "Monday morning, 9 a.m. The entire senior management team will be there, plus the owner and his son who's being groomed to take over the business." Victoria looked up from her laptop where she'd been refining their financial projections. This is their last attempt to avoid either massive layoffs or selling the company outright. If we can't convince them that our approach will work, they'll probably be out of business within 6 months. The weight of responsibility settled over Marcus like a familiar but heavier coat. He'd worked on important projects before, but never one where the outcome would directly affect the livelihoods of hundreds of people. The manufacturing company employed nearly 400 workers, many of whom had been with the company for decades. Their families, their communities, and their futures all depended on finding a solution that could restore the company's competitiveness without destroying its character. "No pressure, right?" Marcus said with a wry smile, but Victoria could hear the seriousness beneath his attempt at humor. "There's always pressure when the stakes matter," Victoria replied, her tone gentle but realistic. "The question is whether you can use that pressure to sharpen your focus instead of paralyzing your judgment. I've found that the projects with the highest stakes often produce the most innovative solutions, partly because everyone involved knows they can't afford to settle for good enough." As they worked through the final details of their proposal, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma and the conversation they'd had the previous evening. She'd been unusually quiet during dinner, and when he'd asked about her day, she'd mentioned that one of her classmates had moved away because her father had lost his job. The story had bothered Emma more than Marcus expected, and she'd asked difficult questions about job security and whether families always had enough money for the things they needed. Marcus had tried to reassure her without making promises he couldn't keep, explaining that while some things in life were uncertain, they would always figure out solutions together. But privately, he'd been reminded of how his own employment situation affected not just his financial security, but Emma's sense of stability and safety in the world. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" Victoria's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he looked up to find her watching him with an expression of genuine curiosity rather than professional assessment. "Sure," he replied, closing his laptop and giving her his full attention. "How do you manage the stress of being solely responsible for someone else's well-being? I mean, when I make business decisions, the consequences are significant, but they're ultimately about money and professional success. When you make decisions as a parent, you're affecting another person's entire foundation for understanding the world." The question surprised Marcus with its depth and thoughtfulness. Victoria had been unfailingly professional throughout their week of collaboration, but this was the first time she'd asked about something that went beyond their business relationship. "Honestly, most of the time it's terrifying," Marcus admitted. "Every major decision I make, I think about how it might affect Emma not just now, but years from now. Will this choice help her or hurt her? Am I modeling good decision-making or teaching her to be overly cautious? Am I providing enough stability while still showing her that it's okay to take calculated risks? Victoria nodded, listening with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for client problems. And how do you make peace with the uncertainty? How do you move forward when you can't know for sure what the right choice is? Marcus considered the question, recognizing that Victoria wasn't just making conversation, but was genuinely trying to understand something important about decision-making under pressure. I think you have to accept that there's no such thing as a perfect decision, only the best decision you can make with the information and resources you have at the time. And you have to be willing to adjust course if new information changes. The situation. That sounds like good business advice too, Victoria said with a slight smile. The principles are probably similar, Marcus agreed. Whether you're raising a child or running a company, you're trying to balance short-term needs with long-term goals, and you're making decisions that affect other people's lives. The scale is different, but the fundamental challenge of leadership is the same. Victoria was quiet for a moment, seeming to process his words. Then she asked, "Do you ever wonder what kind of parent you might have been if you'd had more resources from the beginning? If you hadn't had to worry about money and could have focused entirely on the relationship side of parenting?" The question touched on something Marcus had wondered about many times, usually late at night when the financial pressures felt overwhelming and he questioned whether his choices were limiting Emma's opportunities. "I used to think about that a lot," he said honestly. "I'd see families with more money and wonder if Emma was missing out on experiences or opportunities because of our situation. But over time, I've come to believe that some of our best moments have come from having to be creative and resourceful together." Marcus thought about the elaborate blanket forts they'd built during power outages, the treasure hunts he'd created using household items when they couldn't afford expensive toys, the cooking experiments that had resulted from having to make meals from whatever ingredients they had on hand. Emma has learned to be adaptable, creative, and appreciative of simple pleasures in ways that I'm not sure she would have if everything had always been easy, he continued. She understands that good things often require effort and planning, and she's developed problem-solving skills that serve her well in school and friendships. Victoria listened intently, and Marcus could see her mentally connecting his parenting philosophy to their business collaboration. "So you think having constraints can actually lead to better outcomes than having unlimited resources?" "In some ways, yes. Constraints force you to be more thoughtful about priorities and more creative about solutions. They also teach you to appreciate success when it comes because you understand how much work went into achieving it." Marcus paused, then added, "I think that's part of why your business model works so well. You're not trying to solve problems by throwing money at them. You're finding elegant solutions that work within real-world constraints." The conversation was interrupted by Victoria's phone buzzing with an urgent message, and Marcus watched. Her expression changed as she read it. Her professional composure remained intact, but he could see tension building around her eyes. "Problem?" he asked. "Potentially. Meridian's owner just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Apparently, one of their major clients is threatening to cancel their contract if delivery delays continue." Victoria set down her phone and rubbed her temples. "If they lose that contract, our timeline for implementing improvements becomes much shorter. We might be looking at a turnaround situation instead of a growth optimization project." Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he processed the implications. A turnaround situation would mean working under intense pressure, with even higher stakes and less margin for error. It would also mean longer hours, more travel, and the kind of schedule that could easily overwhelm his carefully balanced life. "As a single father, what does that mean for our proposal?" he asked, already knowing that the answer would require them to restructure everything they'd planned. "It means we need to present two scenarios," Victoria said, her strategic mind already working through the new challenges. Option 1 assumes we can proceed with the original timeline and approach. Option 2 assumes we're in crisis mode and need to implement the most critical improvements immediately, while developing a longer-term plan for comprehensive change. They worked late into the evening, reconfiguring their proposal to address the new urgency while maintaining the thoroughness that would be necessary for long-term success. Marcus found himself drawing on skills he'd developed during his most challenging freelance projects, when clients had needed immediate solutions to critical problems. But the scale and complexity of this situation pushed him into territory he'd never navigated before. "I should probably head home," Marcus said around 9 o'clock, realizing that Emma would be worried if he was much later. Mrs. Shun had agreed to stay with her during the extended work sessions, but Marcus tried to maintain some predictability in his daughter's routine, even when his schedule became demanding. "Of course," Victoria said, looking up from the financial models she'd been revising. "Thank you for putting in these long days. I know it's not easy with Emma's schedule." Marcus packed up his materials, but paused before leaving. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you having second thoughts about partnering with someone who has the kind of constraints I have? Someone who can't work unlimited hours or travel constantly?" Victoria stopped what she was doing and looked at him directly. "Honestly, working with you this week has convinced me that those constraints are actually advantages, not limitations. You're more efficient than most people I've worked with because you have to be. You're better at prioritizing because you understand the real cost of time. And you bring a perspective on sustainable business practices that comes from living a sustainable life." She stood and walked around the desk to face him more directly. "I've spent years working with people who could dedicate unlimited time to projects, and I've watched most of them burn out or produce work that looked impressive, but wasn't actually sustainable. You've shown me that it's possible to do excellent work within realistic parameters, and that's exactly what our clients need." Marcus felt a wave of relief mixed with renewed confidence. "Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it." "It's not just what you need to hear, it's what I believe," Victoria replied. "And tomorrow, when we present to Meridian, that combination of excellence and realism is going to be exactly what they need to hear too." The drive home gave Marcus time to process the intensity of the week and prepare for the conversation he knew he needed to have with Emma. She was getting old enough to understand that his work affected their lives in important ways, and he wanted to be honest about the opportunities and challenges they might be facing. He found Emma in the living room with Mrs. Chun, working on an elaborate art project that appeared to involve a significant percentage of their craft supplies. Both of them looked up when he entered, and Marcus could see Emma evaluating his mood with the perceptiveness that had become one of her most reliable traits. "How was work, Dad?" she asked, setting down her markers and giving him her full attention. "It was good, but intense," Marcus replied, settling onto the couch beside her. "We're working on a really important project that could help a lot of people keep their jobs." Emma nodded seriously, understanding the connection to the story she'd shared about her classmate's family. "That's good. Are you helping fix their computers?" "Computers and other things too. Sometimes when companies are having problems, it's not just because their technology isn't working well. It's because the people and the systems and the communication all need to work better together." Mrs. Chun smiled at Marcus over Emma's head, recognizing his attempt to explain complex business concepts in terms his daughter could understand. "It sounds like very important work," she said. "Emma has been telling me about her school project on community helpers. She decided to write about people who help businesses, like her father." Marcus felt a warm glow of pride mixed with the weight of responsibility. Emma was watching him navigate this new opportunity and drawing conclusions about work, success, and what it meant to help other people. The example he set during this transition would influence her understanding of career decisions and risk-taking for years to come. "Mrs. Chun, would you like to stay for dinner?" Marcus asked, grateful as always for the stability and wisdom their neighbor brought to their lives. "That would be lovely," Mrs. Chun replied. "Emma and I were just discussing what kind of celebration dinner you might want after your big presentation next week." Marcus looked at Emma, who was grinning with the kind of mischievous excitement that suggested she'd been planning something elaborate. "What kind of celebration dinner?" "It's a surprise," Emma said firmly. "But Mrs. Chun says we should always celebrate when someone works hard on something important, even if we don't know how it will turn out." The simple wisdom of the statement struck Marcus powerfully. He'd been so focused on the outcome of the presentation and its implications for their future that he'd forgotten to appreciate the process itself. Working with Victoria had been challenging and exciting in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Regardless of whether the Meridian project worked out, he'd already learned and grown in valuable ways. Over dinner, Marcus found himself telling Emma and Mrs. Chun about the manufacturing company and the families who depended on finding solutions to complex problems. Emma listened with the kind of engaged attention she usually reserved for stories about space exploration or animal behavior, asking questions that revealed her growing understanding of how the adult world of work connected to the things she cared about. "Do you think you can help them?" Emma asked as they cleaned up after dinner. "I think we have a good chance," Marcus replied honestly. "But even if this particular project doesn't work out, working with Victoria has shown me that I can handle bigger challenges than I thought I could. That's valuable regardless of what happens next." Emma nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Mrs. Chun says that sometimes the most important thing is learning that you're braver than you thought you were." That night, after Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Marcus sat at his kitchen table reviewing the materials for Monday's presentation. The proposal they developed was comprehensive and realistic, addressing both the immediate crisis and the long-term sustainability challenges. He felt confident about the technical solutions and the implementation timeline. But beyond his professional confidence was something deeper, a sense that this week had marked a turning point in his understanding of his own capabilities and potential. Whether or not the Meridian project succeeded, Marcus knew that his partnership with Victoria had already changed him. He'd discovered that his years of freelance work had prepared him for challenges he'd never imagined taking on. He'd learned that his perspective as a father and his experience managing complex constraints were actually valuable business assets. And he'd seen that it was possible to pursue ambitious professional goals without sacrificing the relationships and values that mattered most to him. The next morning brought a call from Victoria that Marcus had been both expecting and dreading. The emergency board meeting at Meridian had confirmed their worst fears. The company was facing an immediate crisis that would require dramatic action within weeks rather than months. "They want to hear our presentation, but they're also interviewing 2 other consulting firms," Victoria explained. "One is a large corporate restructuring company that specializes in rapid cost-cutting. The other is a technology consulting firm that promises quick fixes through automation." Marcus felt his heart sink. Competing against large firms with established reputations and unlimited resources seemed like an impossible challenge, especially when the client was in crisis mode and looking for immediate results. "What are our advantages in this situation?" he asked, reminding himself of the strategic thinking Victoria had been teaching him throughout the week. "Our advantages are exactly what we've been talking about all week," Victoria replied with more confidence than Marcus felt. "We understand that sustainable solutions require addressing both technical and human factors. We can implement improvements that will actually stick because we're not just imposing changes from the outside. And we can work within their budget and timeline constraints because we've built our approach around realistic parameters." Marcus took a deep breath, remembering Emma's words about being braver than you thought you were. "Okay, let's show them what we can do." Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Marcus dressed carefully in his best suit, checked his presentation materials one final time, and headed to Victoria's office with a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded him of his first day of school. Victoria was already there, looking polished and confident in a way that Marcus envied and admired. But when she looked up as he entered, he could see the same nervous energy in her eyes that he was feeling. Ready to change some lives? She asked with a smile that was both genuine and slightly forced. Ready as I'll ever be, Marcus replied. Let's go show them what partnership can accomplish. As they drove toward the Meridian manufacturing facility, Marcus thought about all the factors that had led to this moment. The chance encounter at the coffee shop, the leap of faith they'd both taken in deciding to work together, the week of intensive collaboration that had pushed both of them to new levels of performance. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the future of their partnership, but the direction of his entire career and the kind of example he would set for Emma about courage, ambition, and the possibility of building something extraordinary from unexpected beginnings. The boardroom at Meridian Manufacturing felt like a courtroom, where the verdict would determine the fate of 400 families. Marcus sat beside Victoria at the polished conference table, acutely aware that every person in the room was evaluating not just their proposal, but their credibility as potential saviors of a company on the brink of collapse. The senior management team looked exhausted, their faces bearing the strain of months spent watching their life's work slowly disintegrate despite their best efforts. Robert Meridian, the company's founder, was a man in his 60s with calloused hands and sharp eyes that suggested he'd built his business through a combination of hard work and shrewd decision-making. His son David sat beside him, clearly being groomed for leadership but obviously struggling with the weight of inheriting a company in crisis. The other executives around the table represented decades of combined experience in manufacturing, but their expertise felt inadequate against the forces threatening to destroy everything they'd built. Before we begin with the presentations, Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions, I want everyone to understand the reality we're facing. Morrison Industries gave us 30 days to resolve our delivery issues, or they're canceling a contract that represents 40% of our annual revenue. Without that contract, we'll be forced to lay off more than half our workforce and sell our equipment to pay off debts. The stark presentation of facts settled over the room like a weight, and Marcus could see the fear and determination warring in the faces around the table. These weren't abstract business challenges, but real people facing the potential destruction of their livelihoods and their legacy. We've invited 3 consulting teams to present solutions, David added, his voice tight with stress. Each approach is different, but we need to make a decision by the end of the week. We can't afford to spend time on solutions that won't work or timelines we can't meet. Marcus felt Victoria's calm presence beside him as they waited for their turn to present. The first consulting team, from a large corporate restructuring firm, had presented a plan focused primarily on cost reduction through automation and workforce elimination. Their approach would indeed solve the immediate financial crisis, but at the cost of destroying the company culture and eliminating the skilled workforce that represented Meridian's greatest asset. The second team, from a technology consulting firm, had proposed implementing an entirely new software system that would supposedly optimize every aspect of the manufacturing process. Their presentation was impressive and their technology was cutting edge, but Marcus could see the skepticism in the faces of the experienced managers who had lived through previous failed attempts at technological salvation. Ms. Ashford, Mr. Rivera, we're ready for your presentation, Robert said, and Marcus could hear both hope and wariness in his tone. Victoria stood with the kind of composed confidence that came from years of high-stakes business presentations, but Marcus could see the slight tension in her shoulders. That told him she understood exactly how much was riding on the next 30 minutes. Thank you for the opportunity to present our approach, Victoria began, her voice clear and strong. Before we talk about solutions, we want to acknowledge something that we believe sets this situation apart from typical business consulting. Challenges. Meridian Manufacturing isn't failing because of fundamental flaws in your business model or your workforce. You're struggling because the external environment has changed faster than your internal systems could adapt. Marcus watched the faces around the table, noting the slight relaxation that came with hearing their situation described in terms of external challenges rather than internal failures. Victoria's opening had immediately reframed the conversation, from one about blame to one about adaptation. Our analysis suggests that Meridian has 3 core strengths that position you for not just survival, but significant growth, Victoria continued, advancing to a slide that highlighted the company's skilled workforce, established customer relationships, and flexible manufacturing capabilities. The question isn't whether you can compete in today's market, but how quickly you can leverage these strengths more effectively. Marcus stood to present the technical analysis, feeling the familiar calm that came with discussing problems he understood thoroughly. We've identified 5 specific bottlenecks that are creating the delivery delays Morrison Industries is concerned about. These aren't fundamental flaws in your operation, but coordination issues that can be resolved with targeted improvements to your communication and tracking systems. He walked the group through their detailed analysis, showing how information delays between departments were creating cascade effects that multiplied small problems into major disruptions. Unlike the previous presenters who had focused on replacing entire systems, Marcus demonstrated how strategic improvements to existing processes could eliminate the bottlenecks without requiring massive capital investment or workforce disruption. The beautiful thing about this approach, Marcus explained, highlighting specific examples from their analysis, is that we can implement the most critical improvements immediately while building toward longer-term optimization. You don't have to choose between solving your immediate crisis and positioning for future growth. David leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of timeline are we talking about for the immediate improvements? 2 weeks for the first phase of implementation, Victoria replied confidently. We can resolve the communication bottlenecks and implement basic tracking improvements that should eliminate most of your delivery delays. The more comprehensive system improvements would happen over the following 3 months, but the immediate crisis would be addressed within your 30-day deadline. Robert exchanged glances with his management team, and Marcus could see genuine hope beginning to replace the desperation in their expressions. What about costs? The other proposals require significant upfront investment. Our approach is designed to be cash flow positive from the beginning, Victoria explained, advancing to their financial projections. The immediate improvements require minimal capital investment because we're optimizing existing systems rather than replacing them. The cost savings from eliminating delivery delays and reducing waste should more than offset our fees within the first month. Marcus stepped forward to address what he knew would be the executive's primary concern. We also want to be completely transparent about something the other presenters haven't mentioned. Real organizational change requires your people to embrace new ways of working, and that only happens when they understand and believe in the improvements. He gestured toward the management team. You've built a company culture based on craftsmanship, reliability, and personal relationships. Any solution that destroys that culture might solve your immediate financial problems, but it would also eliminate the foundation of your long-term competitiveness. Our implementation process includes comprehensive training and support too. Ensure that your workforce becomes advocates for the changes rather than obstacles to them, Victoria added. We don't just install new systems and walk away. We work with your people until the improvements become part of how Meridian naturally operates. The questions that followed were detailed and challenging, but Marcus found himself energized, rather than intimidated by the technical discussions. Working with Victoria had sharpened his ability to think strategically about business problems. while maintaining his focus on practical implementation. Together, they were able to address concerns about timeline, cost, risk management, and long-term sustainability with a level of depth and specificity that clearly impressed the management team. One final question, Robert said as the formal presentation concluded. Why should we trust our company's survival to a partnership that didn't exist a week ago? The other firms have track records with companies our size and established teams with relevant experience. Victoria and Marcus exchanged a quick glance, and Marcus could see that she was deferring to him to answer the most important question of the presentation. Because we're not treating this as just another consulting project, Marcus said, meeting Robert's gaze directly. I have a 7-year-old daughter who's taught me that the most important decisions in life are about taking care of the people who depend on you. Victoria has built her reputation on delivering sustainable solutions rather than quick fixes. Together, we bring a combination of technical expertise and long-term thinking that your company needs right now. He paused, thinking about Emma and Mrs. Chen and all the people whose lives had been enriched by choosing partnership over self-interest. The other consulting firms will move on to their next project, regardless of whether Meridian succeeds in the long term. We're proposing a partnership because we believe in your company's potential, and our success is directly tied to your success. More than that, Victoria added, we're offering something the other firms can't, a guarantee. If our immediate improvements don't resolve the delivery issues within 2 weeks, we'll refund our fees and help you implement whichever alternative approach you choose. We're confident enough in our analysis to put our own success at risk. The room fell silent as the executives absorbed the implications of what Victoria had just offered. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he realized she'd made a commitment they hadn't discussed. But looking at her calm expression, he understood that she was demonstrating exactly the kind of partnership thinking she'd been describing all week. Robert stood and walked to the window overlooking the manufacturing floor, where workers were going about their daily routines, unaware that their futures were being decided in the room above them. After a long moment, he turned back to the group. We'll need some time to discuss your proposal with the board, he said. But I want you to know that you've given us the first realistic hope we've had in months. Your approach addresses our immediate crisis without sacrificing everything we've built here. As they packed up their presentation materials, Marcus could feel the nervous energy that came with having given everything to an opportunity that mattered more than anything he'd attempted in years. Victoria moved with her usual professional efficiency, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands that told him she was feeling the same combination of exhaustion and anticipation. Did we really just guarantee results we're not entirely sure we can deliver? Marcus asked quietly as they walked to the parking lot. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it was completely unguarded. We guaranteed results I'm absolutely sure we can deliver, as long as we work together the way we have this past week. Sometimes confidence isn't about knowing the outcome, it's about trusting your preparation and your partner. The drive back to the city gave them time to decompress and process what they'd accomplished. Marcus found himself thinking about how different he felt from the freelancer who had fixed Victoria's laptop just 2 weeks earlier. Not just more confident, but more complete, as if he'd been operating at partial capacity without realizing it. Regardless of what happens with Meridian, Marcus said as Victoria navigated through downtown traffic, working with you has reminded me of something I'd forgotten about myself. What's that? That I'm actually good at this. Not just fixing technical problems, but solving complex challenges that require both analytical thinking and creative implementation. I'd started to think of myself as just a service provider, but you've helped me see that I'm actually a strategic problem solver. Victoria was quiet for a moment before responding. You've helped me remember something important too. I've been so focused on building a successful business that I'd forgotten why I wanted to be successful in the first place. Working with you Seeing how you balance ambition with responsibility has reminded me that the best achievements are the ones that make other people's lives better." They were interrupted by Victoria's phone ringing with a call from her assistant. Marcus could only hear one side of the conversation, but Victoria's expression grew increasingly animated as she listened. "That was Robert Meridian," she said. After hanging up, "They want to move forward with our proposal. Full implementation starting Monday morning." Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror that reminded him of the moment Emma had been born. Everything was about to change in ways he couldn't fully predict, but the change represented possibility rather than crisis. "So we're really doing this," he said, more statement than question. "We're really doing this," Victoria confirmed. "Partners in every sense of the word." The celebration dinner that night was held at Marcus's apartment, with Emma and Mrs. Chun as honored guests. Emma had prepared an elaborate feast of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, which she served with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for state dinners. Victoria arrived with flowers for Mrs. Chun and a children's book about business for Emma, gifts that showed she understood the importance of the relationships that sustained Marcus's life. "So you're going to help save the company where people make things?" Emma asked Victoria during dinner, her 7-year-old directness cutting through any pretense or adult complexity. "We're going to try," Victoria replied seriously. "Your dad and I are going to work together to help them solve their problems so they can keep making good products and taking care of their workers' families." Emma nodded approvingly. "That's important work. Mrs. Chun says that helping people keep their jobs is one of the most important things grown-ups can do." Mrs. Chun smiled at being quoted, but Marcus could see the approval in her eyes as she watched Victoria engage naturally with Emma. Throughout the evening, Victoria asked thoughtful questions about Emma's school projects, listened to her theories about everything from dinosaurs to space travel, and seemed genuinely interested in the concerns and enthusiasms of a 7-year-old. After Emma went to bed, the 3 adults sat in the living room with coffee and the kind of comfortable conversation that develops between people who have shared something significant. Victoria asked Mrs. Chun about her experiences building a life in a new country, and Marcus was struck by the parallels between his elderly neighbor's story of courage and adaptation and the leap he was taking with his new partnership. "You know," Mrs. Chun said thoughtfully, "when I first came to this country, I was terrified of making mistakes that would hurt my family's chances for success. But I learned that the biggest mistake would have been letting fear prevent me from taking opportunities to build something better." Victoria nodded, clearly moved by the older woman's perspective. "I think I've been so focused on controlling outcomes that I forgot how much you can accomplish when you trust the right people and commit to working together towards shared goals." As Victoria prepared to leave, she pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that regardless of how the Meridian project goes, working with you has already changed my perspective on what business partnership can be. You've shown me that it's possible to be ambitious and successful while still prioritizing the relationships and values that make success meaningful." Marcus felt a warmth that had nothing to do with professional achievement and everything to do with recognition and mutual respect. "Thank you for taking a chance on someone who didn't look like an obvious business partner. You've given me an opportunity to use my skills in ways that matter, and that's a gift I'll never take for granted." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same Meridian manufacturing boardroom where they'd presented their proposal, but the atmosphere was completely transformed. The delivery crisis had been resolved within the promised 2 weeks. Morrison Industries had renewed their contract with additional volume, and the comprehensive system improvements had positioned the company for sustainable growth. More importantly, the workforce that had been facing potential layoffs was now being expanded to meet increased demand. "I have to admit," Robert Meridian said as he signed the contract for the next phase of their partnership, "when you two walked in here, I was skeptical about trusting our company's future to consultants I'd never heard of. But you've delivered everything you promised and more. David, who had taken on increased responsibilities as the company stabilized, added his own perspective. The difference between your approach and what other consultants have tried here is that you actually listen to our people and build solutions that work with our culture instead of against it. The improvements feel like natural evolutions of what we were already doing well. Victoria and Marcus exchanged the kind of look that had become familiar over months of successful collaboration. They developed an almost telepathic working relationship, each anticipating the other's thoughts and complementing their partner's strengths in ways that made their combined capabilities far greater than the sum of their individual skills. The drive back to the city gave them time to reflect on how much had changed since their chance encounter at Corner Grounds Café. Victoria's company had evolved from a solo consulting practice to a true partnership with shared ownership and shared vision. Marcus had transitioned from freelance survival mode to building something substantial that would provide security and opportunity for Emma's future. "I've been thinking about what we want to tackle next," Victoria said as they discussed potential new clients. "There's a non-profit organization that works with veterans transitioning to civilian careers. They're struggling with outdated systems and limited resources, but they're doing incredibly important work." Marcus smiled, recognizing the shift in Victoria's priorities that had developed alongside their partnership. Early in their collaboration, she had focused primarily on high-profit opportunities with established companies. Now she was equally interested in projects that could create social impact, even when the financial returns were more modest. "That sounds perfect," he replied. "Emma's been asking more questions about how our work helps people, and I'd love to be able to tell her about helping veterans find good jobs." As they pulled up to Marcus's apartment building, Victoria surprised him by asking, "Would you mind if I came up to say hello to Emma? I brought her something from our client visit today." Emma was delighted to see Victoria, greeting her with the enthusiasm she reserved for favorite people and special occasions. Victoria had brought a small toy truck from the Meridian Manufacturing gift shop, along with a story about how the real trucks they'd seen being loaded with products that would travel all over the country. "Did you really help save all those jobs?" Emma asked with the directness that still sometimes caught adults off guard. "Your dad and I worked together to help them solve their problems," Victoria replied. "But the people at the company did the hard work of making the changes and building the products. We just helped them figure out how to do what they were already good at, but better." As bedtime approached and Victoria prepared to leave, Emma made an announcement that surprised both adults. "Victoria, I think you should come to my school's career day next month. I want to tell everyone about partnership and how people can work together to solve big problems." Victoria looked genuinely touched by the invitation. "I would be honored to come to your career day. We could talk about how different kinds of expertise work together to solve problems that no one could solve alone." After Emma went to bed, Marcus walked Victoria to her car in the warm spring evening. The city was settling into its nighttime rhythm, but their neighborhood felt peaceful and full of possibility rather than busy and overwhelming. "Thank you," Marcus said as they stood beside her car. "Not just for the business opportunity, though that's been incredible. Thank you for helping me remember what I'm capable of and for showing Emma what partnership can accomplish." Victoria smiled with genuine warmth. "Thank you for reminding me that success isn't just about what you achieve, but about who you become in the process of achieving it. Working with you has made me a better business person and a better person generally." As Victoria drove away, Marcus looked up at the apartment where Emma was sleeping safely, and Mrs. Chung was probably still awake reading one of her mystery novels. The life he'd built through careful choices and constant attention to his daughters' needs had been transformed by unexpected opportunity, but the foundation remained the same: love, responsibility, and the conviction that taking care of the people who mattered most was the only success that really counted. 6 months later, Marcus received a call that brought their story full circle. A young single mother who was trying to start a freelance graphic design business had been referred to their partnership by a mutual contact. Her laptop had crashed with a critical client project, and she was facing the same kind of technological crisis that had brought Marcus and Victoria together. "Bring your laptop to our office," Marcus told her. "And bring your business plan too." Sometimes the best partnerships start with one person helping another solve an immediate problem. As he hung up the phone, Marcus thought about the chain of connections and small kindnesses that had led to the transformation of his life. Emma, now 8 years old and proud of her father's success, had learned that courage and competence could create opportunities beyond anything they had previously imagined. Mrs. Chun continued to be their anchor and wisdom source, delighting in the family's prosperity while reminding them that the best achievements were those that lifted others alongside yourself. Victoria had become not just a business partner, but a true friend. Someone who understood that the most sustainable success was built on relationships and values that mattered more than money. Together, they had created something that neither could have achieved alone, a business that was profitable and meaningful, challenging and sustainable, ambitious and humane. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of their shared office space as Marcus prepared for another day of solving problems that mattered for people who deserved better than they had been getting. In a few hours, he would pick up Emma from school and listen to her stories about second-grade adventures and friendship drama, and the 1,000 small discoveries that made childhood endlessly fascinating. Life had become more complex than it had been when his biggest concerns were paying rent and keeping his laptop running, but it had also become richer and more purposeful. Sometimes the best changes came not from careful planning, but from saying yes when opportunity knocked, especially when that opportunity came disguised as a simple request for help from a stranger in a coffee shop. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.